So let's now talk a little bit about the organization of your resume and some of the content that you're going to have there. Um, for the header of the resume, one of the things I see a lot of students doing is um, giving their complete address. So street number, street, town, province, postal code. That information is not really necessary in the resume because nobody sends hard copy documents to job applicants anymore. This may have been relevant 30, 40 years ago, back before the age of computers, where all the invitations and all of the acceptances and stuff would happen first by a written invite and then by telephone. Um, you don't need to give your full legal name. And this is particularly true for internationally trained professionals who perhaps have multiple names. What you want to do is use just the first name that you will typically use in the office and your family name. So Terry Akwesi, this is somebody that I actually worked with. Actually, it's not. It's a a pretend person, but it's similar to somebody I worked with, where their name actually had 4 different names, but Terry is the name that they go by in the workplace. And so use that because it means that communication will be easier, and it'll be easier when you get to an interview because they'll already know what to call you at that stage. And also, you don't need to label your phone number. You don't need to label your email address because everybody knows that a 10-digit number is not the email address and it's not your name. They know that that is a phone number. So labeling just takes up space. Taking those labels out makes everything look cleaner. And you can put everything on a single line. You don't need to have address, email, phone number, because that takes up space in the resume. And what you really want to do is you want to be very economical with this space, especially if your resume is long, because you need to cut it down as much as possible. You want to fit everything into 2 pages. The next section, and this is something that is important, particularly for experienced lawyers, for people who have a variety of different work experience, maybe legal and non-legal, but for people who are not straight out of law school. If you are straight out of law school, you can probably skip the profile summary. That's the feedback that I've received from legal recruiters. But if you do have a good amount of experience, it's useful at the very, very beginning of the resume to just kind of give a very, very quick summary of who you are and what you're about. And it's almost like a handshake that lets the recruiter know what to expect as they look at the rest of your resume. And so you want to make your professional status clear. So here we've got an internationally trained law student licensed to practice in Ghana and pursuing requalification in Canada. You can't, if you're an internationally trained lawyer who's licensed in another country, you can't really call yourself a lawyer in your application because in Canada, you're not recognized as a lawyer. So you would call yourself an internationally trained law student licensed to practice in your country and pursuing qualification in Canada. And that makes your status clear to the legal recruiter about exactly where you stand. Then you can talk about the length of experience that you have in different legal areas and in what activities. Uh, if you have some personal attributes that stand out, you can address them in the profile. This particular profile doesn't include any of those. And then you can have some current work and education status. So this person is currently working as a volunteer with Pro Bono Law Alberta, and they're enrolled in PrEP with completion expected in fall 2021. So this style of paragraph, it shouldn't be too long. You should be looking at maybe 4 to 6 lines maximum, but give an idea of what your career looks like, and then you're going to expand on that through the rest of the resume. The next section that we're going to get into for an articling resume, and this is something that I see a lot when I do resume reviews, is that a lot of experienced applicants will put their education at the end of the resume and they'll put their employment first. For legal recruiters, education is the most important assessment criteria for candidates for an articling position. And so it makes sense to put your education section right at the top of the page. If you're using a profile, it would be the next section so that the recruiter doesn't have to go hunting for the education information. So you've got here, this is somebody who's an internationally trained lawyer. They've got their CQ as their second piece of information. And this particular student is enrolled in prep already, and so they've put prep in as well. You'll notice that for prep, they've got the start date. The student started in December of 2022, and it goes until the present because they're still enrolled in the program. For all of the other education that they've had, you don't need to put the duration of the education. All you need to show is when you received that particular qualification. And you can see that each piece of education information is, again, on a single line to save space. So you've got the qualification, you've got the provider of the education, and then you've got the dates on the right. And this is a good way to put it because it's short. It provides all the necessary information that the recruiter wants. And in some cases, if you have additional information about the education, you can see here for the barrister at law, you can include bullet points in the education section, but try to limit this because you want to keep the education section fairly short. Next, we get into job descriptions. And the important thing about your job descriptions is that you need to add value and you need to show some impact. We don't just want to know what you've done, but we want to know how well you've done it, and whether you were actually helpful to your client and whether you actually helped your employer to be more successful. One of the other things about job descriptions is that, for example, if you were if you articled in another country or you articled in another province and now you're looking for articles in a prep province because you need to get local articles to get called to the bar, if you call yourself an articling student, most legal recruiters know what an articling student does. And so telling them all of the things that you did doesn't necessarily add a lot of value unless you add some specific detail about the scope of the work that you did and some potential impacts that you made. The other thing is, especially for internationally trained lawyers, your employers are probably not well known in Canada. And so if you list your employer, but you don't tell us anything about the employer, then the legal recruiter has a hard time maybe figuring out in their head what the context for your work was. So some of the things that you should include in your job description include the employer context. So what kind of organization was it? Was it a small firm? Was it a big firm? Was it a government organization? Was it a nonprofit? The products and services. So if it was a legal firm, you could talk about the areas of law that that firm practiced. And who were your clients? Were they primarily individuals or were they companies? And then finally, the size. So how many partners were there? How many lawyers were there? How many staff altogether? How many locations did this firm have? Was it a national firm? Was it a local firm to a particular area? That kind of information is going to help the recruiter to understand the kind of employer that you were working for. The job context. So again, as I said, a recruiter knows what an articling student did. So you can be very, very brief about the description of the activities of the job. So you might want to talk about who you reported to. So did you report to a senior lawyer? Did you report to one of the partners? Did you report to the managing partner? Or if it's outside of law, did you report to the director of policy or something like that? You don't need to give the name of the person, but who did you report to? And then the high level accountability. So, again, what areas of law did you work in? What legal activities did you do? But you don't need to give too much detail here. And we'll see an example of this shortly. And then finally, the bullet points in your job descriptions. Here is where you want to talk about the scope of work and the project details. So make these relevant to articling. You want to talk about how often, how much, how many. So give us, how many clients did you interview in a month or in a week? How many court cases did you attend and advocate in on a yearly basis? Those kinds of things. If you made an organizational or departmental impact, or you helped the clients. So if there's a particular case that you worked on, was the final decision from the judge beneficial to the client, and how was it beneficial? Make that clear as well. So here's an example of this is the same student that said that they were volunteering currently at Pro Bono Law Alberta. And you can see that we've got the first thing is the employer name. We've got the dates of employment there. And then we've got the brief description of Pro Bono Law Alberta. What does that organization do? Then we've got the job title. And then we've got a very brief summary of the main parts of that job for that particular candidate. And then for the bullet points, what we're doing is we're taking the information from the job summary and we're expanding on some of those points to give further information. And all of this is information that is relevant to articling. So as I said, focus on items that are relevant to the target firm and to the target role, which is articling, and highlight any matches and omit any detail in the description that doesn't really fit the employer. Here is the same student, and this is a job that they had where they were not working for a law firm. They were working for a company as an internal kind of legal and administrative officer. Again, they've described the employer, so we can see that 12 employees, 90 contractors, the range of services that they provided. And so very quickly, the legal recruiter can kind of imagine the work that this person was doing. We've got the fact that they reported to the CEO, what they manage day-to-day operations. They haven't gone into detail about what day-to-day operations means. And they've talked a bit about some of the other areas related to law that they focused on. And then in the bullets, they've gone into much more details. So you can see here that they're talking about how many transactions they edited and reviewed contracts for in that first bullet. They've talked about the value of those contracts. And so they're kind of really kind of placing themselves and showing that they made a really positive impact to the revenue of this particular organization through the work they did. And the other bullets are also quite detailed. Nothing there is overly vague. We can imagine this person doing the work with this employer. The main focus here, though, even though they may have in their administrative role, they may have done a lot of things that are not related to working as an articling student, they didn't include that information in the job description because it wasn't going to be relevant to the employer. And then this is just an example of if you have a long list of experience, if you've had 6 or 7 jobs and you're worried about how am I going to fit all of these 6 or 7 jobs into my resume, the big thing is that you don't have to give detailed descriptions for everything. The standard kind of recommendation is to give a detailed description for 2 to 4 jobs, depending on how relevant they were to your articling application. And you should go back a maximum of 10 to 15 years. So if you've been working for longer than that, you may even cut some of those jobs out completely and not put them in the resume. And that's totally fine. But if you do have previous roles that you want to include, but perhaps they're quite junior to the most recent roles, you can just list them as we've got here. You can have a previous role subsection and then just show the job title, the employer, the location, and the dates. And this makes those open for questioning in an interview. And it also shows a little bit more information about your job history without giving too much detail and without taking too much space. Okay. I don't have anything in here about volunteer roles, but volunteer roles can be presented very similarly to a typical job description role. So again, give the name of the organization, give the organization description, give your title, what was the main point of your job. Typically with volunteer roles, the number of bullets will be a lot less than they are for a job description. So you might just have 1 or 2 bullets there, and that's fine. Finish off your resume with an interest section. All the legal recruiters that I've spoken with have told me that they like to learn something about applicants for articling roles. They like to learn something about them outside of the workplace. So give them some interests. They want to learn about you as a whole person. Very commonly in an interview, the first question will be, did you have any trouble finding the office? Or if it's a virtual interview, did you have any trouble logging in? The second question will often be, I see in your resume that you like reading, or I see in your resume that you like singing. Can you tell us a little about that? And that's just kind of like an icebreaker. And so by presenting these interests in your resume, you're actually making it easier for the recruiter to start the interview because we have something that we can talk about that we know you will be comfortable discussing. One thing about interests is make the interests interesting. So you want to tell something more. So rather than just saying, I like cooking, reading, and singing, that's not very interesting. But about cooking, perhaps you can tell some things about the kinds of foods you like cooking, something you recently learned how to make, why you enjoy it, those kinds of things. So yeah, make interests interesting by saying something interesting about them. Um, and if you have elements that showcase, qualities that are useful in the workplace, then that's great too. So for example, if you are a marathon runner, that interest could be great. And you could highlight the fact that marathon running takes a lot of training, it takes a lot of dedication, it takes planning. And so those are all elements that are going to be impressive to a recruiter because it's like, wow, this person is really motivated and they are able to set goals for themselves. And that's important in an articling position. So basically, from what I've said in the first 2 sections of this presentation, the resume is not about you, the candidate. It's about what the employer needs. And so you need to make sure that the story is not everything that you feel is important about you, but you're taking that information and you're making it something that is relevant so that the employer is going to be attracted to the information that you've given. And that attraction is going to actually cause them to want to give you an interview, and it's not going to turn them off. Okay, so it's about the employer needs, it's not about you.